Welcome, everyone, to the Deep Dive. We're the place you come to get the crucial context, the complex arguments you really need to be properly informed.
That's the goal.
And today, wow, we are really diving deep. We're tackling a source text that's, well, it's pretty intense. It's part philosophical treatise, part spiritual guide, and it does not pull any punches.
No, it really doesn't. It's not just inciting you to think about things differently. It's actually laying out a rigorous logical proof, very structured.
Right, designed, it seems, to lead you, the listener, to one single, and what the author claims is an inescapable choice.
Exactly. It's presenting a kind of closed system of logic. The core idea, the author's premise, is that the historical appearance of Isus, and that's the spelling the source uses, I-S-U-S, for Jesus ChrEstos, that event was so radically disruptive.
Disrupted how?
Disruptive in a way that it logically corners every single person of faith. It forces them, compels them really, into making one specific non-negotiable move, a shift in allegiance.
Okay, and you mentioned structure. The source uses specific labels, right? Like A, Z, Q. Very formal, almost mathematical.
Precisely. A is about the identity question. Who is the old lawgiver? Z relates to the law itself. J is the appearance, the event of Isus. And Q is the conclusion, the required action.
So before we get lost in the intricate web of logic and evidence here, maybe let's just say it plainly. What's the final destination? What is Q? What's this ultimate conclusion the system argues you just can't avoid?
Okay, the bottom line, the Q, is this. It doesn't actually matter, logically speaking, for the required action, who you believe the old law God is. Whether you think that God is the same entity Isus revealed, or someone. Well, somewhat different, a lesser power maybe.
Doesn't matter, that sounds controversial already.
For the required action, Q, the source argues it doesn't. Because regardless of that identity question, Isus's arrival calls you to definitively turn your back on that whole former regime, the one based on law, fear, performance.
An old rule book.
Exactly. Turn your back on that.
Yeah.
And instead, turn your face towards the true Father Isus spoke of. And you do that purely through faith and love, without relying on the law at all. That's Q.
Okay, so our mission today seems pretty clear then. We need to unpack this logic step by step, show why the source argues this massive choice, this exodus, like you said, from the old structure, why it's presented not just as a good idea or a theological preference, but as a logical necessity.
A necessity flowing directly from observable facts about the world and the specific actions and words of Isus himself.
And just to be clear for everyone listening, we're focusing purely on the argument structure today. Its internal logic, its premises, its conclusions, and the consequences the source draws from that. We're not necessarily endorsing it, but exploring its architecture.
Absolutely. Understanding the mechanics of the proof. That's the goal.
All right, let's get into it. The source starts, interestingly, not with scripture right away, but with an analogy. Something to set the stage, establish the conflict. It's called the kitchen table picture.
Yeah, it's designed to make the core tension immediately relatable. It asks you, the listener, to imagine your workplace, or maybe even your home life. Imagine two completely different management styles trying to operate in the same space at the same time.
Okay, so what's the first style?
First, you've got the boss of rules. This manager runs everything, and I mean everything, based on a massive, incredibly detailed handbook. Every task, every procedure, every allowable thought, it's all codified.
Sounds exhausting.
It is. And the core requirement is perfect compliance, 100% performance, zero deviation, all the time. If you mess up, even slightly, well, there are consequences. The whole system runs on fear and guilt. Perform perfectly or pay the price.
So it creates this atmosphere of constant anxiety, people always looking over their shoulder, feeling like they're never quite good enough.
Exactly. It's entirely transactional. You perform, you get rewarded, maybe. You fail, you get punished. Everyone's burnt out, probably paranoid, always trying to make up for inevitable mistakes.
Okay, that's one picture. Then the analogy shifts.
Radically. Suddenly, the real owner walks in. Now, this owner has a completely different vision for how things should run. He sees the culture of fear, the constant scorekeeping, the guilt.
And says,
essentially, stop. Put the handbook down. This rule of fear, it's over. Come work with me directly. Forget the performance anxiety. Let's operate based on trust, on love, on relationship.
So the impossibility is trying to do both at once. You can't simultaneously follow the fear-based handbook and rest in the owner's grace-based approach.
Precisely. The two systems are fundamentally incompatible. You have to choose which reality you're operating in. That's the core conflict the analogy sets up.
And that analogy, that choice, it paves the way for the actual logical foundation stones, right? The source lays out 3 axioms, these basic observable starting points it claims anyone has to accept, regardless of their specific faith. What's the first one? It's a hard look at reality, isn't it?
It is. Truth number 1 is what the source calls the axiom of flawed creation. This isn't just saying things are imperfect. It's a deeper claim that the fundamental system of the world we inhabit is broken. It operates in a way that's inherently flawed.
Okay, flawed how? What's the evidence presented? Is it just about human sin?
No, it's broader than that. The source points to the very mechanics of reality. It spends quite a bit of time on the empirical evidence. Look at nature, it says. How does it function? Predation.
The lion and the gazelle again.
Right. Life consumes life. The virus overtakes the cell. There's this inherent violence, this hierarchy of consumption built into the natural order. That seems fundamentally at odds with an idea of a perfectly good, peaceful, original design, doesn't it?
If peace is the ultimate goal, yeah.
Then look at human systems. History is filled with empires built on brutal exploitation, slavery. Even today, you see systemic suffering children in factories, environmental destruction through strip mining, vast inequalities. And then there's the universal reality of decay, disease, death.
Hospitals, cemeteries.
Every single one is evidence, the source argues, that this current order doesn't produce universal peace or flourishing. It seems to run on pain, on competition, on eventual breakdown and death. A tragic necessity seems built in.
Okay, so the philosophical way here is what? That this brokenness means this system cannot be the final, perfect expression of a truly good creator or father.
Exactly that. If you believe in an ultimate reality, a true father whose kingdom is defined by total peace, justice, love, nonviolence, which is the promise in many traditions, right? Then this observed reality defined by suffering and death must be something else, something temporary, flawed, not the final destination.
So recognizing this isn't just being pessimistic, it's a crucial first step in the logic.
It's presented as an objective diagnosis. This specific creation, this world system, isn't the ultimate kingdom. And that observation directly undermines any claim that following rules within this broken system can somehow save you from it.
Which leads directly to the rules themselves, the law.
Which brings us to truth number 2, the axiom of the unfulfillable law. This is formally labeled Z, not Z. It states very bluntly that the old rulebook, the law, cannot save you. Salvation, conceived as a reward for perfectly keeping a comprehensive religious or moral code like the law of Moses. It's impossible.
Why impossible? Is it just because people slip up, make mistakes?
It's deeper than just external actions. The law, as interpreted in many traditions and by Isus himself, demands internal perfection too. Not just don't murder, but don't harbor anger. Not just don't commit adultery, but don't entertain lustful thoughts.
Total purity, inside and out.
Yes, and it demands this 100% of the time from the moment you're born until the moment you die. Now combine that impossible standard with axiom 1, the fact that we live in flawed systems, flawed bodies, prone to failure and decay, and just basic human psychology shows we can't maintain perfect internal purity constantly.
So the law, when used as a checklist for earning salvation, is set up to fail from the start?
It has to fail. Therefore, its actual function isn't salvation, it's something else.
Which is?
Condemnation. Or maybe diagnosis, like you said earlier. It acts like a mirror. A mirror is fantastic for showing you that you have dirt on your face. But the mirror itself can't wash the dirt off. It reveals the problem, but offers no solution in itself.
So DZ, the law is not the path to salvation, a definitive conclusion based on the standard and our reality.
That's the argument. It's proven ineffective by its own requirements and the nature of the world described in Axiom 1.
Okay, Axiom 1, flawed world. Axiom 2, law can't fix it. What's the third piece?
Truth number 3, the axiom of the radical alternative. This one's labeled J for Isus. Into this setup, the broken system, the impossible law, a new voice appears on the scene, Isus. And his entire message, his actions, his very presence stand in direct functional opposition to the first 2 axioms.
Opposition how? What are the key examples the source uses?
Well, it's shown in both his words and, crucially, his deeds. He directly contradicts the existing rule set. The source points to specific moments where he shows this sovereign disregard for the law's jurisdiction when mercy is needed.
Like healing on the Sabbath?
Exactly. The man with the withered hand in Mark 3. Healing him was a clear violation of the Sabbath codes as they were understood. But Isus did it anyway, demonstrating the human need that mercy trumped the performance rule. That's a direct challenge to the law's ultimate authority.
And didn't he also challenge the food laws?
Yes, Mark 7, where he declares all foods clean. Boom! Just like that. Centuries of complex purity codes dissolved by his authority. It shows he's operating from a different source, a higher mandate.
And he didn't just break rules. He diagnosed the whole system, didn't he? Said some pretty stark things about it.
He really did. Critically, he says, "My kingdom is not of this world." That establishes this profound separation, an ontological gap, between his authority, his Father's reality, and the systems running this world, including the lawgiver system.
And he even talks about the ruler of this world as distinct from his Father.
Yes, several times in John's Gospel. He speaks of the prince or ruler of this world being judged or cast out,
Yeah.
implying a different entity than the true Father he reveals.
And then he replaces the entire complex law with
One simple, all-encompassing command: love one another as I have loved you. That's it. That's the new operational mandate.
Okay, so if we accept these three starting points, the world is flawed, axiom 1, the law within it can't save us, axiom 2Z, and then Isis arrives, offering a completely different way, based on love and claiming authority outside this system, axiom 3J, where does that leave us?
It leaves us logically constrained. It sets up the inescapable choice the whole argument revolves around.
Right, this is where the argument gets really interesting, I think. It moves beyond just observing problems and into this kind of philosophical judo move. We know the law fails. We know Isis appeared with an alternative J. The big question left hanging is about the lawgiver, the source of that old rule book. The source labels this question A.
Exactly. What is Isis's relationship to the creator, the being who established the law in the first place? Are they the same, or are they different, A?
And the core argument here, the really clever part, is that the answer to that huge theological question actually doesn't matter for the action you need to take.
That's the crux of it. The source calls this an exhaustive decision analysis. It argues that while the answer to A versus A might be fascinating, maybe even vital for developing a complete cosmology, it's logically irrelevant to the practical required action cue. Whichever path you go down, A or A, you end up in the same place regarding what you must do.
Okay, let's walk through that. Path 1. Let's suppose Isis is the creator, A. So the same being who originally dictated that harsh, perfect performance handbook.
For boss of rules from the analogy.
Right. That same being then shows up in person as Isis and starts teaching unconditional mercy, demanding trust instead of terror, and basically ignoring the enforcement of the old legal system he supposedly created. What's the logical consequence of that?
The unavoidable conclusion is that the creator himself has changed the game. He's enacted a fundamental shift in his operational method. The source uses the term economy, his way of dealing with humanity.
Okay, economy here doesn't mean money, right? It means like the system of management.
Precisely. It's the divine administration, the arrangement for the relationship. It doesn't imply God changed his eternal nature or made a mistake before. It means the method of governance he employs has been sovereignly updated, superseded by a new revelation of his character.
So the old demands of the law, the debt incurred by failure.
They've been dealt with, fulfilled, canceled by the king himself through Isis. This act cancels the law's jurisdiction over those who accept the new command, the new economy of grace and love.
So if the king himself walks in and says, okay, the old wartime rules are over, we're operating under peacetime rules now, then sticking to the old wartime rules becomes what? An act of disloyalty.
It becomes disobedience to the king's current command. You're ignoring the highest, most recent revelation. The source even points to passages in the Old Testament itself, like God repenting or relenting in Genesis, Exodus 32, 1 Samuel 15.
Passages that often make people uncomfortable.
Right. But the source uses them as textual evidence that even within the old framework, the lawgiver was depicted as capable of changing his approach, his economy. So Isis's arrival is presented as the ultimate change, the ultimate new economy. His self-revelation through love simply revokes the former mode based on fear and rule-keeping.
And the logical result is?
Renounce the former regime.
Yeah.
Leave the fear-based system behind. Follow the Father as newly revealed in Isis. That's Q. It's inescapable if A is true.
But wait, this feels radical. Are you saying the whole massive theological debate about whether the God of the Old Testament is the same God as the Father Jesus spoke of, that whole thing gets sidelined, reduced to a footnote for practical purposes? That seems like it would alienate a lot of traditional believers.
It definitely challenges views that insist on the absolute continuity of God's method or economy. But the logic presented is strict. If God is one, A is true, and his ultimate nature is revealed in Isis as love, then the appearance of Isis must be the definitive clarification. It's the dismantling of the temporary fear-inducing scaffolding that was the law.
So the choice isn't about resolving some deep theological paradox.
The choice under Path A is simple obedience. The original author has issued a new directive. You follow the latest, highest command. The practical action required is Q, leave the old system.
Okay, that's path A. Now, let's explore the alternative. Path 2. Suppose Isis is not the creator. This is the idea, found in some ancient streams of thought, maybe Gnosticism, that the being who created this flawed world, axiom 1, and gave the impossible law, axiom 2, is, well, not the ultimate true God, maybe a lesser power, a demiurge, an archon.
Right, a local administrator, perhaps, of this particular flawed system. In this scenario, Isis comes as a messenger from outside this system, revealing the existence of a true father, an ultimate good reality beyond the reach and rules of this world's maker.
Like a rescuer showing up at a prison run by a harsh warden with impossible rules.
That's a very good way to put it. Isis, in this view, exposes the local god of law as essentially a false claimant to ultimate authority. Maybe a tyrant, maybe just limited, but definitely not the true father. He's the warden of this flawed creation, enforcing his impossible rules. Isis reveals the true king and points to the escape route, the narrow gate out.
And if you're a prisoner who suddenly realizes the warden is a fraud and there's a rescuer offering freedom, what's the only rational moral response?
Immediate defection. You renounce the authority of the false warden instantly and unconditionally. You follow the rescuer towards the true father.
Which is Q again?
Which is once again Q. Renounce the false object of worship, abandon the prison rules, and follow the call to the true father revealed by Isis.
Wow, the logic seems to seal it shut. Whether you believe the lawgiver is the father who changed his approach, or the lawgiver is not the father, and Isis revealed the true one, the required action is identical.
That's the unbreakable theorem, as the source presents it. AQ. The OR covers all possibilities regarding the creator's identity. Either way, the conclusion is Q. The regime is either revoked by its own author, or it's exposed as false by a higher authority.
The practical result is the same. Turn your back on the law regime, the fear system, and embrace the Father through love and trust.
Exactly. The decision tree converges completely onto that single practical movement of allegiance. Your internal metaphysical belief about who the lawgiver was becomes secondary to the required exodus. The change of address for your loyalty is the same, no matter the underlying why.
Okay, that convergence point is incredibly powerful as an intellectual structure. But, let's be real, systems built on fear, on tradition, on ritual, on performance, they don't just vanish because of a logical proof, right? People, especially those trained in legalistic thinking, are going to look for ways out, for loopholes, for reasons to stick with what they know.
Absolutely. The human mind is incredibly adept at justifying the status quo, especially when change feels threatening. The source anticipates this very strongly. It includes what it calls an arsenal of refutations, detailed responses to the most common intellectual objections and evasions people use to avoid the conclusion Q.
Good. Let's spend some real time on these counter-arguments, because I think for a lot of listeners, this is where the rubber meets the road. If these objections hold water, the whole logical structure might seem less compelling. What's the first big one?
Probably the most frequent, the one almost everyone reaches for first, is what the source labels the attack on the fulfillment gambit. This tries to use Isis's own words against the idea of leaving the law.
Right, the famous line from the Sermon on the Mount, "Do not think that I have come to abolish the law or the prophets. I have not come to abolish them, but to fulfill them." Matthew 5.17. The objection is basically, see, he said fulfill, not abolish, so the law must still be valid, still binding.
Exactly. It sounds like a slam dunk for keeping the law in place. But the antidote provided hinges entirely on understanding what fulfill actually means in this context. Fulfillment, the source argues, isn't extension, it's completion. It's a sovereign act that brings something to its intended purpose and therefore ends its period of active jurisdiction.
Can you give an analogy?
Think about the blueprints for a house. The blueprints, the law, are absolutely essential, valid, and authoritative while the house is being built. But once the house is finished, the blueprints are fulfilled. They've achieved their purpose. They aren't thrown out as trash. They still represent the design, but they no longer dictate the daily actions of the construction crew.
So if the workers keep trying to build according to the blueprints after the house is standing, that's absurd.
It's absurd, or it leads to chaos. They should be living in the house, not still trying to build it. Similarly, Isis fulfilled the law. He embodied its ultimate purpose, which pointed towards him and the relationship he offered. Once he arrived and completed that work, the law's role as the binding covenant for salvation ceased. It was fulfilled.
So fulfillment, in this view, is the ultimate abolition of the law's power to command believers. It's not a confirmation of its ongoing enforcement.
Precisely. Fulfillment is the mechanism of its decommissioning, in a sense. You absolutely have to read Matthew 5.17 alongside Isus's actions, healing on the Sabbath, declaring foods clean. These weren't minor tweaks. They were acts of sovereign authority overriding the law's specific commands. He was demonstrating that the era of the law's rule was being superseded by the era of the kingdom he embodied.
So claiming fulfill means keep obeying forever is a misunderstanding of completion.
It's taking the word out of the context of his entire life and mission, which was about bringing something new. The law pointed towards Q. Once Q arrived in person, the pointer's job was done.
Okay, that's a strong counter. What's the next major objection people raise? It often targets that first axiom, doesn't it? The flawed creation idea.
Yes, this is the gymnasium trap. It's a more philosophical or perhaps stoic objection.
The idea being,
The objection goes like this. This world isn't fundamentally a flawed prison we need to escape. Instead, it's more like a gymnasium, a training ground. Suffering, challenges, limitations. They aren't defects. They're necessary tools designed to build our character, our spiritual muscles, resilience, virtue. Therefore, the system isn't broken. It's perfectly designed for our growth.
that has a certain appeal, doesn't it? Finding purpose in hardship. How does the logic address that?
The antidote has two parts. First, it points out that even if you accept the gymnasium analogy, you've actually, perhaps unintentionally, conceded to Z the axiom of the unfulfillable law. Why? Because the gymnasium is a means to an end. It's the place you train for something else. It's not the final destination itself.
Ah, so if suffering is just training, then the training itself isn't salvation. Salvation must be something beyond the gym.
Exactly. The gym model inherently confirms the system is temporary and preparatory, not the ultimate reality. So it implicitly agrees you need an exodus from the gym eventually. But the second, more powerful part of the antidote goes back to what the source calls the primacy of the revealed command.
Meaning Isus's own verdict.
Yes. Who gets the final say on whether this world is a good enough gym or a flawed system? According to the source, Isus does. And his definitive statement, "My kingdom is not of this world," serves as the divine judgment. He diagnosed the system as insufficient, as separate from his Father's reality. So the believer aligns with his assessment, not just a humanistic hope that the suffering is good for us. We are called out of this world system, even if it has temporary training benefits.
Okay, that tackles the gymnasium. What about defenses that get more
Wow.
mystical, the ones that appeal to God being beyond our understanding?
Right. This leads us to the paradox trap. This is a very common move in theology, actually.
The objection is essentially God is mysterious, right? He contains multitudes. He's both justice and mercy, maybe. He's both the lawgiver and the loving Father. These aspects seem contradictory to our limited human minds, but they coexist in God as a sacred paradox. So we shouldn't use human logic to try and resolve this tension. We should just embrace the mystery.
It's a powerful way to shut down critical analysis, isn't it? It's a paradox. Stop thinking so hard. But the antidote insists on a crucial distinction: the difference between genuine divine mystery and simple moral contradiction.
What's the difference? How do you tell them apart?
Divine mystery involves concepts that transcend our finite comprehension, but don't necessarily violate fundamental moral coherence. Things like, how can the infinite God be present in finite time? Or the concept of the Trinity 3 in 1. These boggle the mind, but they don't inherently present God as acting in morally contradictory ways.
Okay, so what's a moral contradiction then?
A moral contradiction would be, for example, a God defined as perfect love, simultaneously commanding acts of genocide, or demanding blood sacrifice for minor infractions while also claiming to be purely merciful. Or, critically for this argument, establishing a law he knows is impossible for his creation to keep, thereby setting them up for condemnation while simultaneously claiming to desire their salvation. These aren't just mysteries, they're inconsistencies in moral character.
And Isus's role, according to this logic, was to
resolve the moral contradiction, not to bless it as a paradox. By establishing love as the single ultimate command and demonstrating mercy that overrides legal judgment, Isus revealed the true, consistent nature of the Father and effectively ended the regime where those contradictions seemed necessary or valid.
So clinging to paradox to justify, say, divine violence or the impossible demands of the law
Is seen by the source as a defense mechanism. It's a way to hold on to the uncomfortable or inconsistent parts of the old system, the fear, the violence, the transactional nature that Isus came specifically to overturn. If the highest revelation is love, then any previous command or depiction that fundamentally violates that love must either be a temporary measure now superseded, or perhaps even a misrepresentation of the true Father that Isus corrected.
That's a sharp distinction.
Yeah.
Okay, moving on, there's another sophisticated evasion, particularly from more maybe Eastern influence or philosophically minded perspectives.
Yes, the non-duality evasion. This one tries to dissolve the entire logical fork altogether.
How does it do that?
The objection basically says, look, the apparent conflict between the creator figure, the lawgiver, and the father figure, revealed by Isus, is ultimately an illusion. It's a product of our dualistic thinking. In reality, both are just masks, manifestations, or aspects of a single, underlying, transcendent reality. There's no real separation. Therefore, the binary choice Q, the demand to leave one for the other, is unnecessary. We just need to realize the deeper unity.
That sounds philosophically profound. It bypasses the whole A versus A problem by saying both are fundamentally one. How does the source counter that? It seems to undercut the entire logical structure.
It acknowledges the philosophical weight of non-dual thought, for sure. Many traditions explore that ultimate unity. However, the antidote brings it back to functional reality versus metaphysical ontology. It argues, okay, maybe at the ultimate level everything is one, but how did Isus himself speak and act within this temporal reality?
He seemed to draw some pretty sharp lines.
He absolutely did. He didn't speak primarily in terms of transcendent unity. He spoke in terms of required allegiance now. He constantly presented choices. You serve God or mammon, wealth materialism. You enter through the narrow gate or the wide gate. Most pointedly, he drew a clear line between the source of his opponent's spiritual allegiance and his own. You are of your father the devil versus my father. John 8:44.
So the argument is, regardless of ultimate metaphysics, the revealed command from Isus J demands a functional, binary choice of loyalty in this life.
Precisely. To claim that the clear line Isus drew is just an illusion we should transcend is functionally to contradict Isus himself. It violates that primacy of the revealed command. Maybe ultimate reality is non-dual, but the instruction for us, now from the highest authority presented in the system, Isus, is to make a clear distinction and choose allegiance. Non-dual philosophy can't erase that practical, immediate demand. The logic forces a choice of loyalty here, and that's Q.
Okay, one final objection mentioned in the outline. It's a subtle one, focusing on the word renounce.
Right, the attack on logic, equivocation on renounce. This is like a last-ditch effort to pry apart the two paths, A and A, right at the convergence point Q.
How does it work?
The objection says, wait a minute, renouncing a former mode of the true God, which is what you do in path A, where God changed his economy, is a fundamentally different kind of act, metaphysically, emotionally, maybe even ritually, than renouncing a false god or a demiurge, which is what you do in path A. So even if the action looks similar, the internal reality is so different that you can't really say the outcome Q is identical. They feel different.
It's arguing the quality of the renunciation is different, therefore the outcome isn't truly the same Q.
Yes, it's a sophisticated distinction based on internal experience and theological nuance. But the source cuts through this by returning, one last time, to the concrete, practical outcome.
What's the final word on this?
It asks, what do you actually do? Let's look at the practical, observable action. If path A is true, God changed the rules, what do? You stop performing the rituals of the old law aimed at earning favor. You stop operating out of fear of that law's judgments. You turn away from that mode of relating to God.
Okay. And if path A is true, lawgiver was a false god.
What do? You stop performing the rituals of that false god's law. You stop operating out of fear of his judgments. You turn away from them.
So in both cases, the concrete actions are stop the old fear-based performance, cease the rituals of Sinai, stop the spiritual scorekeeping, turn your back on the god of law figure.
Exactly. The external action and the internal reorientation of allegiance away from the law regime is identical. The Exodus Q is one single concrete movement. Whether your internal motive is I'm obeying the king's new orders, path A, or I'm defecting from the warden, path A, the practical result is the same. You walk away from the old system and towards the Father revealed by Isus, based on love and trust. The metaphysical why doesn't change the required what. The convergence holds.
All right, we've navigated the logic, the axioms, the fork, the refutations, and the argument seems to arrive consistently at Q, this required exodus, this turning away from the law regime. But this can't just be an intellectual checkmate, right? The whole point of the source seems intensely practical. So let's bring it down to earth. What does this renouncing the god of law, leaving the fear regime, what does that actually look like in your daily life, listener?
That's the crucial question. And the source is very keen to define it carefully, starting with what it is not.
Okay, important distinctions first. What is Q not?
First and foremost, it is absolutely not a call for civil anarchy. Renouncing the God of law does not mean you stop obeying traffic laws, paying your taxes, or respecting the legal system of your country.
What is
Because civil laws serve a different function. Their purpose is practical: maintaining social order, keeping streets safe, providing a framework for society to operate. You adhere to them because they're necessary for communal life, part of loving your neighbor in a practical sense, perhaps. But crucially, the source emphasizes civil law does not save souls. It's about earthly order, not eternal allegiance.
Okay, so not anarchy. What else is it not? Does it mean living completely without rules, just doing whatever feels good?
No, definitely not. It's not about throwing out all structure. Instead, it's about moving from a massive, complex, ultimately unfulfillable rulebook, the old law or any similar system, to living under one single overarching rule.
Which is?
Love one another as I've loved you,
Yeah.
John 13.34. That becomes the sole command, the guiding principle of the new regime revealed by Isus. Every other ethical decision, every action either flows from that command or fails to meet it. It simplifies everything down to that core mandate of active love and mercy.
Okay, so if the external behavior might still look pretty civil, and it's not about lawlessness but about a single law of love, what is the core practical shift? What defines actually making the Exodus queue?
It's fundamentally about changing the address of your spiritual allegiance and the currency of your relationship with the divine. It manifests in several key ways. First, you actively, consciously stop treating religious codes, rituals, traditions, or moral performance as the path to life, salvation, or divine acceptance.
Getting off the performance treadmill.
Completely. Second, and this is huge, you must stop the transactional bargaining with God. This is really the heart of the old fear regime, isn't it? The whole, if I do X good deed, then you, God, owe me Y blessing. Or conversely, if Z bad thing happened, it must be your direct punishment for my mistake A.
That kind of spiritual scorekeeping, wow, it's so deeply ingrained in so many religious and even secular mindsets. How do you actively fight that habit? It seems almost automatic for many people.
It requires conscious, deliberate effort, especially at first. The source suggests you have to learn to recognize the pattern. Scorekeeping shows up when you interpret everyday events, a job loss, an illness, a success, as specific divine rewards or punishments based on your recent performance. It shows up when you count your prayers or charitable acts and feel either smug or guilty based on the tally. It shows up when you use your goodness as leverage, expecting God to act a certain way in return.
So what's the replacement behavior? When that thought arises, I deserve this, or God owes me, what do?
You pivot. Instantly. You consciously interrupt the thought. You turn your focus away from your performance, good or bad, and towards the Father. You might even say internally, my standing isn't based on what I did today. It's based entirely on my trust in your mercy revealed through Isus. You actively replace performance anxiety with a conscious choice to rest in trust.
And doing that presumably changes how you relate to God. It removes the fear.
It fundamentally changes the dynamic. It allows for direct, unfiltered communication. You start speaking directly to the Father whom Isus revealed. No intermediaries needed, no complex rituals required to cleanse yourself first, no priest acting as a gatekeeper unless they're helping you connect, not blocking. Your access is immediate, based on the Father's love and your trust, not on your ritual purity or moral perfection. Fear recedes because the relationship isn't based on your ability to meet impossible standards anymore.
Okay, that's the internal shift. To make this very concrete, the source actually outlines a kind of 30-day plan, not as a new law, I assume, but as a practical way to establish this new direction.
Exactly. It emphasizes direction over perfection. It's about practicing the turn, making Q real in daily choices.
So what are those first few steps like? How does it start on day one?
Day one is the conscious declaration. It's the moment you actually make the choice Q internally. You deliberately turn your mental and spiritual face towards the Father revealed by Isus, and you declare maybe, verbally, maybe just with focused intent, your departure from the fear regime. You renounce the rule of the God of law over your soul's standing. It's a foundational act of will.
Okay, a clear starting point. But
Yeah.
what about day two? Because inevitably, people will slip up, right? Old habits die hard.
Absolutely inevitable.
Mhm.
Day two directly addresses failure. When you fall back into fear or transactional thinking, or fail to act in love. The instruction is crucial. Do not engage in bargaining or elaborate penance. Don't start negotiating your way back into God's favor.
So no, okay, God, I messed up, but I'll do 3 extra good deeds.
None of that. That's the old regime sneaking back in. Instead, you immediately pivot back to trust. You simply acknowledge the failure to the Father. I failed, I messed up, but I trust your mercy completely, not my ability to perform or apologize perfectly. Please lift me up, help me keep going. It's about reinforcing reliance on mercy, not re-engaging the performance contract. This is the anti-bargaining practice.
Okay. Then day 3 shifts the focus outwards.
Yes, day 3 moves from internal allegiance to external action based on the new command. It instructs you to perform one quiet, deliberate act of mercy or kindness towards someone you don't technically owe anything to, someone outside your usual circle of obligation.
Why that specific instruction?
Because it helps rewire your motivation. The act should be driven purely by love or compassion, not by duty, expectation of reward, social pressure, or trying to score points. It's practicing the new economy of grace in a tangible way, shifting your ethical engine from obligation to outflowing love.
Makes sense. And day 4 sounds like ongoing maintenance, mental defense.
It is. Day 4 is about vigilance. You have to actively filter the messages you receive from religious leaders, from culture, from media, even from your own internal thoughts. The instruction is, reject any message that tries to manipulate you primarily through fear, threat, or guilt.
Because fear is the currency of the old system.
Exactly. Fear, guilt, threat. Those are the tools of the God of Law regime. The Father revealed by Isus operates through love, mercy, trust. You have to become discerning and refuse to transact in the old currency of fear. If a message makes you primarily afraid of God or his punishment, it's suspect under the new regime.
And the rest of the month, days 5 through 30.
You essentially repeat that cycle. Keep consciously turning to the Father, day 1. Keep trusting mercy over performance when you fail, day 2. Keep practicing unsolicited love, day 3. Keep rejecting fear-based manipulation, day 4. It's about building the habit, establishing the new direction for your life. The goal isn't 30 days of perfection. It's 30 days of consistently practicing the turn, Q.
That makes the Exodus feel much more like a process, a reorientation, than a one-time magical event. Okay, let's tackle some lingering big questions I imagine listeners might have. These often come up when you talk about leaving law behind. First, the big one, antinomianism. The fear that if you remove the law and the threat of punishment, people will just go wild right. Society will collapse into chaos.
It's a classic, understandable fear, especially for those who believe fear is the only thing keeping people decent. The source's response is twofold. First, as we said, civil law remains for social order. Q isn't about street crime. But second, and more profoundly, the true antidote is that genuine transformation by the Father's love doesn't produce worse behavior. It produces profoundly better lives.
That's so.
The idea that external rules and fear are required to make people fundamentally good is, in itself, a deep distrust of the power of love and grace. The source argues that someone truly touched and changed by the Father's unconditional mercy is motivated by gratitude and love to live well, to honor that relationship, not exploit the lack of legalistic oversight. Love becomes the motivator, and it's far more powerful than fear in the long run.
Okay, the second common reaction. This sounds too easy. Doesn't this whole turn to the Father by trust thing just give terrible people a free pass? Someone lives a horrible life, then just says, I trust. Where's the justice?
It only sounds easy if you misunderstand the nature of the turn, Q. It's not a free pass without the turn. The turning itself, that complete internal surrender of self-reliance, the renunciation of the old allegiance, the casting of oneself entirely on mercy, that is presented as the most profound and in many ways the most difficult act a human can perform. It requires demolishing pride and ego.
So the turn itself is the point of crisis, the judgment.
Yes. When sincere, that turn is simultaneously the judgment on the old, fear-based self and life and the entry point into healing and transformation. It's not about intellectual assent. It's a fundamental reorientation of the will. Those who refuse to make that turn, who cling to performance or self-justification, whether religious or secular, remain under the old system of transactional cause and effect, regardless of what they call it. There's no pass without the genuine turn, Q.
All right. One last practical question, church affiliation. Given the sharp critique of law-based systems, does this practical Exodus Q imply that you have to leave organized religion, abandon your church or community?
The source says no, not necessarily. Q is primarily an internal reorientation of spiritual allegiance, not necessarily an immediate institutional break. You're actually encouraged to gather with others. The key criterion isn't the label in the building, Catholic, Protestant, Orthodox, non-denominational, whatever.
So what is the criterion for choosing or staying in a community?
The criterion is functional. Does this community genuinely help you turn your face towards the Father revealed by Isus? Does it cultivate trust over fear? Does it encourage love and mercy in action? Does it help you live out Q? If yes, great, join it, participate. However, the instruction is equally clear. Actively avoid any community, teacher, or message, regardless of its religious branding that systematically trains you back into the old regime.
Back into performance anxiety, spiritual scorekeeping, fear of divine punishment, reliance on rituals for acceptance.
Right, exactly. If the functional mechanism of the community is primarily fear-based manipulation and legalistic bargaining, then it's reinforcing the very system Q calls you to leave. The label's irrelevant. The operational dynamics, fear versus love, law versus grace is everything. Find communities that foster the latter. Hashtag take outro. So just to wrap up the core logic for those listeners who really appreciate the philosophical architecture here, the source presents a formally sealed argument, it says. Given the historical event of Isus's appearance and message, J, and given the demonstrated failure of the law as a viable path to salvation, Z, then the required action, the movement of allegiance away from the law regime towards the Father Q, becomes logically necessary. And this necessity holds true regardless of how you resolve the metaphysical identity question of the lawgiver. The conclusion Q is structurally unavoidable within the system's premises.
That structural requirement really is the final powerful claim. The source essentially argues that Isus drew a line in the sand, a bright line between the kingdom of fear and performance and the kingdom of the Father based on love and trust. And every objection we've discussed today, the fulfillment argument, the gymnasium idea, the paradox defense, non-duality, the equivocation on without fines, they're all presented as sophisticated attempts to blur that line, deny its existence, or justify not crossing it.
Their attempts to stay somehow tethered to the old regime while claiming allegiance to the new one, which the logic says is impossible.
So the choice ultimately is placed squarely before you, the listener. You've heard the axioms, you've followed the logic, you've considered the objections.
And the ultimate takeaway, the absolute core of Q, is that the single defining act that changes everything is turning your back on the God of law, that whole system, and turning your face fully towards the Father revealed by Isus. And that turn isn't powered by your effort, your performance, or your fear. It's actuated purely by trust, by faith, and by responding to love.
So, where does this leave you? What does this deep dive mean for your life, starting now? The final provocative thought the source leaves us with isn't about intellectual agreement. It's not asking if you agree with every jot and tittle of its theology. The real question it poses is, what practical, concrete action does this apparently inescapable logic demand of you tomorrow morning?
You can analyze it forever, build counter-arguments, debate the premises.
But the source insists. Isus appeared, J. The law fails. The axioms hold. The logic converges. The choice to turn to consciously move your fundamental allegiance from fear to love, from law to Father, that choice is yours. And now, having walked through the argument, the source would likely say, you can no longer claim you didn't know the mandate was placed before you. What will you do?